We will now open the 378th Yomiuri International Economic Society lecture meeting. And today's theme is the future of our alliance. Please welcome Ambassador Emanuel with a big round of applause.
I came to learn that Ambassador Emanuel is very passionate and focused on issues that he cares about. And today's topic, the future of our alliance, naturally falls in this category. So, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is all yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for that introduction. As I look forward to today's both not only this moment, but more importantly, the question and answer session. As I said a little earlier to the management, I always like the questions and answers because, as to quote Henry Kissinger, does anybody have any questions for my answers? And we can kind of go from there in that basis. But this is a opportune time to have this moment in an exchange of ideas, because we are at a critical juncture in our relationship and also a critical juncture in the region for the values, interests, and ideals that the United States and Japan stand for. And there's never been a more challenging time, but also never a more opportune time. I do believe, as I said when I was confirmed by the United States Senate, that what we do over the next 3 years with the United States and Japan will determine the foundation for the next 30 years for our relationship. And never have we had a period of time, and I'm somewhat of a student of the U.S.-Japan relationship, working for two different presidents, with a more solid foundation of two leaders where both our political, our policy, and our strategic vision is more aligned than at this moment. And while the last 60 years between the United States and Japan have been defined by what I would call or term alliance protection, we are now entering the era and the period of time of alliance projection into the Indo-Pacific. A period of time in which our relationship will be defined not just on security as it relates to defense, but economic security, policy security, and an embracing of values and securing those values and enshrining those values as the organizing principles for the region. And we couldn't have a more opportune partner than Japan with Prime Minister Kishida's leadership. By example and way of referencing that point, when it came to the March 3rd vote in the United Nations, Japan organized a call with the 10 ASEAN countries and produced 8 votes in favor of a resolution on March 3rd, of which 4 out of the 8 co-sponsored that resolution. 10, 15 years ago, that would not have happened with that kind of effort. Japan's leadership also is consistent with the fact that in this region, they sit at a 75% favorable rating. That's in a tremendous bank of soft power in this region to help advance our interests. Now, in the past, it's all been defined by security, and we applaud the idea of a 2% budget increase, or 2% for the national defense budget over the next 5 years. But where that goes, how you invest it, what you do, and the early discussions of counterstrike and counteroffensive as part of the deterrence level is important. And what other areas, and I know we will discuss this. But one of the other things that are very, very important for the region, for the alliance, and for the protection and projection of our values is economic security. Just last month, we hit another milestone. It was the 3-year anniversary, or milestone rather, not anniversary, of Japan being the #1 foreign direct investor in the United States. We see that continue to be illustrated by Panasonic's investment in Kansas in the EV factory. We continue to see it with the other discussion the other day by Honda of their investment in an EV facility in the United States. I've met with CEOs as recently as the other day in Nagoya, 10 of them, talking about their opportunity and investment. But that direct foreign investment supporting, and also the United States investing semiconductors, other types of companies here in Japan. There is a change in economics. I've written a recent piece in the Nikkei. I know I'm not supposed to mention another paper, but just getting the goods through customs here. But about, it is not deglobalization, and it's not snapping back to what happened 5 years ago. COVID, China coercion, and the war in Ukraine is the most unprecedented time of churn, for lack of a better strategic term, in international relations. I think there are three new guiding principles of international economics. In the past 30 years, cost and efficiency were the driving North Stars of that economic system. Cost and efficiency are being replaced, supplanted, by stability and sustainability, political stability and economic sustainability. Second principle that's changed is in the last 20 to 30 years, market access were the driving factor. Going forward, because of Russia and their actions, energy security and stability with a reliable partner will be to the next 20 to 30 years what market access was to the last 20 to 30 years. And then third, a driving principle was always measuring how much you sold. Because of the role of data, it is now how much data you collect and how you deploy it that matters. Now, I'm not saying those are exclusive, but in my view, as you talk to international business leaders, you talk to governments, you talk to government officials, you talk to public policy analysts, you talk to people in academia, those are the three principles that are starting to shape, form what I call stage one, act one of the next period of globalization and economic security. And there are no two greater partners to shape that future, build that future on a shared sense of interest than the United States and Japan. And lastly, I want to close on this. While I talked about economic security and national security, and I'm leaving a lot, obviously, doing this at 10,000 feet, but the people to people. Because in the end of the day, is the United States and Japan treaty allies? Yes. But most significantly, what I've been touched by is that we are friends. And that is something that's deeper and stronger to build on than just what is written on a piece of paper between two governments. And when I was in Okinawa a couple months ago, I sat with 12 kids who are going to study in the United States, all high school kids. And I say this as a father of 3 children. To see in their eyes, to hear in their voices, their enthusiasm, their energy to come to America, to go study in a foreign country, in a foreign state, with a foreign family, as if it was their own. And yesterday, I met with the 26th class of the Mansfield Scholars that have come here from the United States, from our Air Force, from our FBI, from our FDA, from our EPA, all our government agencies, to be embedded in your government, to not only work on the policies, but then to work alongside Japanese people as friends and family. So we are treaty allies, trusted. But most importantly, what I've been struck is by the evolution of that relationship from foe to friend. And we have a foundation to build on for the next generation as we hand that baton off to another generation of Americans and Japanese to build off of what we build now. And our measure will be whether it's stronger, firmer, as those kids from Okinawa reach for the stars. Did we give them something to actually touch it? Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Ambassador. Now we will proceed to a session with Ambassador Ssasae. and Ambassador Emanuel to expand on some of the issues that Ambassador Emanuel raised in his opening remarks.
Ambassador Ssasae, floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me to have this conversation with, I should say, my good friend. I want to say, since you ended your speech about how friendship is important to us. But let me begin our conversation, Ambassador Emanuel, on yourself. You know,
My favorite subject.
yeah. And I think your speech was very focused and clear message was carried through. Very impressive. When I met with you in Chicago when you were mayor, I think you were speaking like that, bullet point. Ambassador, what can you do to make Japanese companies coming to Chicago headquarters? I'm not sure you remember those stuff, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, very clear.
I can't. You want me to repeat it for you?
But, you know, and I was just wondering, on the way here, I was looking at the this event's, brochure. There was your career introduction. And I found out that your master's degree was on speech and communication. You think that was helpful in terms of building your career, or your ability to speak was more developed through your on-the-job training as a congressman and also White House chief of staff, and then later on as a mayor of Chicago? What do you say?
Yes. No. Yeah. I do think there's, first of all, it's not a singular thing.
Yeah.
I worked for President Clinton and President Obama, who I think are, in the 20th century, you'd have to put both of them in the top 10 of the most eloquent public speakers. I mean, in my view, at least, in the 20th century, there's no more powerful public speaker than Martin Luther King.
Sure.
They're just in a class and a category all his own. But in the sense of people in public life, and then being an understudy, I think I was fortunate in my career to work intimately with two great speakers. Then there's nothing, I would not say I was, in the Congress you don't know this, unlike the Senate. But the United States Congress, when you go to the floor, you get basically a minute, maybe 2 minutes, max. So that becomes for a very disciplining process to make an argument concise in 2 minutes or a minute. You're not given a lot of opportunity to talk about your childhood. You have to really get it tight. And then, as mayor every day, etc. But in the sense of analyzing speeches, how I prepare when if I like giving a more formal address, finding the academia at Northwestern was very important. Now, I want to be clear. I worked for 2 years after college, and I really wasn't done studying liberal arts. I really loved liberal arts education. And getting the degree is in speech and communication, but my work was on classical rhetorical theory, studying Cicero. So it's hard to say when you're working for President Clinton and President, what would Cicero say at this moment? So it was really for intellectual exercise.
Yeah.
I got a master's. I wasn't done with it, but when I think about how I've helped a president or helped myself as mayor, and then every day as mayor, you are out speaking, and you have to, I used to joke with President Obama, people really hate the status quo. They're not too excited by change either. So they kind of got you right where you are. And if you're going to confront the real challenge for anybody in public life, and rhetoric is part of this in communication, is how do you make them see change as a friend, not as a foe? And can you give them a way of framing something, seeing something that at first they're reluctant to embrace, and then embrace it as something that they can be for. And can you move enough people? And so Northwestern was helpful to me.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very interesting, observations on the friendship. Now, let me go straight to the points.
So we're done with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, but today you talked a bit about China and Russia. Can we embrace them as a friend? That's there is a choice, of course, between world of freedom or oppression or democracy versus autocracy. It's really hard in terms of value systems and principles and so forth.
Yeah, well, I mean,
please.
As you can probably see, since I'm leaning over on my chair, how I'm going to answer this.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question. It's a very personal question.
Yeah.
If I believe, whatever you want to say, I tell people, I know this comes to shock you, I tell people what I think. You never walk away and go, where does Rahm Emanuel stand on that? You have a contract, Russia has a contract with Europe. As we're sitting here, they just shut off all their energy to Germany and France and Europe. Would that be a friend? Do you really, you didn't ask me to come here this morning to say,
No.
where you have a country that is responsible for depriving Africa of the food they need, has a contractual agreement with Europe to supply energy, they break it, lie about the material coming from Canada to fix, quote unquote, the pipeline, just shut it off, and you're asking me whether you could describe them as a friend? If you do, I got a bridge over the Tigris River you could buy. Number two, and here's what shocks me about China. About 700 million Chinese people over the last 20 years went from poverty up. A lot of credit goes to a way China organized to make sure more people got out of poverty. But they benefited directly from a system that they, from day one, have been violating. Not once, every day. They steal intellectual property. They undermine the system by violating the rules, as it's seen in the international court when it came to the Philippines and the shore. They were a direct beneficiary from an international system that allowed them to take 700 plus million people out of poverty. And you're asking me a question, can we embrace them as friends? My friends don't treat me that way. Let me say this. They treat me that way, they would not be called friends. So it's a simple human question, because in the end of the day, you and I are sitting here, you're interviewing me, we have a level of trust. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting 10 feet away from you.
I do understand what you mean.
Okay, no, but I mean, there's a level of trust. Would you trust Russia? Well, let me ask you, would you sign a long-term contract with a country that just violated it to 30 plus other countries?
Yeah.
Okay, do you call them a friend? Let alone, that was a contract, that's not what a friendship is. I wouldn't. And China actively steals other countries, other companies' ideas. They violate, I just gave you the Philippines. Japan was a recipient, just I think it's 7 years ago, of being targeted on rare metals and minerals by China. Is that a friend? When the THAAD was being deployed in South Korea, China had their country boycott Korean companies. Is that a friend? When Australia had the audacity to ask, how did COVID start? It was a question that the world was asking. Millions of people have died. An entire economic embargo. Lithuania had a question about Taiwan. Totally economically friendly. Is that what a friend does? Now, I get it if it's a one-off, or maybe that country. I don't, it's a pattern. China actively engages in coercion, actively engages in intellectual property theft, actually engages in economic espionage, And then they're shocked when we call them out. You know, there's this great scene in Casablanca, the movie, he goes, I'm shocked that there's gambling. Really?
Yeah.
So, you know, basically after 20 years of what Russia has done and China's done, I wouldn't call them a friend. And I think that's what they're upset about, is that everybody's now calling them out for the truth.
Sure.
And the truth can make you uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah. Well,
I got a lot more I would like to say on this, but I'll just stop right there.
Well, you know, Ambassador, this kind of systemic competitions, I mean, with Russia and China will continue for a long time. Do you think?
Wait. No. I don't mean to do this to you.
You don't agree with me?
No. Economic competition, I get.
Yeah.
What you categorize as economic competition is not stealing ideas, breaking contracts, involved in economic espionage. That is not competition. Competition is, you know,
fair
here,
competition.
I'll put a podium back up, you give your speech, I'll give my speech, and they'll vote on it. That's competition. They don't participate in competition. That's not competition.
Well, let me put this way. Do you think that the future course of China and Russia authoritarian regime is this difficult to change if, say, leaders like Xi Jinping and Putin will be changed, that this could be changed?
I want to make sure I'm answering the question you're asking.
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Do you think that all this, the definitions of China and Russia as a, I say, competitor or potential, enemy or whatever you call, is basically guided by the leadership like Putin and Xi Jinping? If they are changed, there is a chance for a change, or this is more inborn systemic nature of the regime, governance?
Well, first of all, it's two different countries at two different times at
Sure.
two different moments, so it's hard to, I don't want to group it together because I don't think that's fair. So let me say this about China. Chairman Xi, since you're asking me this the day after October 15th was set on the calendar for the next party conference, that will be what looks like the inauguration of an unprecedented third term. I do like to note that Xi has done to China things that the United States could never have done, not even on our best of days, and we're not that good on that. Think about it. Chairman Xi is about to get a third term, and he's the first communist Chinese leader in 4 decades who has no economic growth. He has inaugurated a COVID policy that now makes China a victim of their own strategy, where they can't economic stagnation. 2, or 3 rather, the unemployment rate of the Chinese youth is 19.4%, the highest in the OECD. And when you have a single child policy, that's 19.4% of your mothers who are really angry. There's in fact in China a phrase where the kids just now say, laying down or laying flat. He's about to inaugurate the first Chinese generation of a lost generation. 4th, the tech economy is lying down. Used to be Tencent, Alibaba, Ant, rising stars, gone. Losing a generation. 5th, the CEO of the largest real estate firm in China said it's a full-out housing depression. His term, not mine. Chairman Xi has done more to China economically than we could ever have done on our best of days. So I don't want him to stop. Chairman Xi, keep going. You've done more to China and set it back more economically in 8 years than we could ever have done in economic competitiveness with you. And he cannot get out, because both for political terms but more ego, his zero COVID policy that has China wrapped around an axle. There's just a fact. And that's number one. Number two, I think that he has put also, because he's inaugurated a set of policy, people used to respect China. There's no respect for China politically. Part of the greatest work that's being done now in the region is because of what China has done, and people now realize what they're up to, both economically, security-wise. Look at India and the border war. Look at what they did to the Philippines. Look at what they recently, everybody is alert to an uncontrolled, unanchored, untethered China, all initiated by Chairman Xi. And in their own country, there's massive political and economic unrest. So I think there's a lot that the Chinese people culturally, politically have to offer the world. That is not true of the Chinese Communist Party, which is different. And we all collapse that sometimes, and we need to be distinct. There's a very deep culture with a tremendous amount to offer the world. But I'll give you a classic example most recently that I think why Chairman Xi is politically, economically upside down. They have a major, not alone, because we're experiencing in the United States, Europe's experiencing it, major heat waves. Major rivers are drying up. Their hydroelectric power has come to a halt. What do? Pull out of the climate talks. Now, there's an answer nobody's thought of. That's China, and the world's alert to it.
Yeah, sure. I think there is increasing concern, both on the part of Chinese weakness and also aggressive part. Well, let me add.
Well, the aggressiveness is a way to cover up all the vulnerabilities weakness? And the weaknesses. It's not. It's not about projecting strength. It's actually they live in fear of the Chinese people, as just seen in the banks, and also in the housing area, where the Chinese people say, "We're not doing this anymore. We're not going to keep spending money for our houses that you're not going to build." That game does not work anymore. The Chinese people are saying the same thing to the Chinese leadership that the rest of the world is saying to the Chinese leadership. You can't keep breaking the rules and think we're going to live by the rules. Part of having a rules-based system, let's step back. Part of having a rules-based system is that you know there's an independent third party that both of us will be held to. That's what a rules-based system is. China is part of a rules-based system in which you live by the rules and we'll go a la carte. We'll pick which one we want to live by and which one we want you to live by. Well, that's not how this works. And the rest of the world is saying, those days are over where you get to do that.
Well, don't you think that there's some weakness in the future of Chinese economy that will be also making impact on their external posture, especially like Taiwan? Don't you think that after Pelosi's visit and Chinese show of their teeth, military preparedness, that is kind of alerting the countries in the region, including Japan? I understand that the United States is going to step up its support to Taiwan, political, economic, and militarily. What do you think that Japan and United States can do together on the Chinese issue to maintain Taiwan democracy and economic integrity and security?
Look, I mean, you have like 5 questions in that question, Mr. Ambassador. So, look, I'm not saying that China is the second largest economy, so it's not like, but there's major structural problems that we should not overlook. And a lot of the problems I just noted to you were self-created. And principally, Chairman Xi's thumbprint is at every one of them, whether it's the housing, whether it's the technology, whether it's the youth unemployment, whether it's the COVID policy. His thumbprint is at every one of those scenes. But it has a potential, but he is ruining that potential. That's number one. Number two, as it relates to the Indo-Pacific area, the United States and Japan as partners. And one of the things that worked on in my life, working for 2 presidents, is the link between economic and national security are of a piece. They're heads and tails of the same coin. And you can't de-link them, nor should you. And I think that both Japan and the United States bring a lot of resources to shaping the policy in this and the opportunities in the Indo-Pacific area. And the reason in my remarks I noted Japan's popularity among the people of Southeast Asia is that's an asset. It's an important, essential asset in this region for our collective interests. If you're trying to persuade a government to do something, Japan is a more powerful interlocutor sometimes than even the United States. We bring a lot of our strengths to them, and part of this relationship is figuring out what is best for us to lead, what is best for Japan to lead, and in our collective interest. But one of the things I will say, which I think why I think the next 3 years are so essential for the next 30. Now I'm somewhat, I don't know if I would use the word bias, it doesn't really capture, but when I first worked for President Clinton, there were 7 ambassadors in the 8 years of Clinton's term. As I can see it right now, President Biden has one ambassador, one prime minister rather. President Biden has Prime Minister Kishida, outside of the Okinawa election, no election, a 3-year term, and who has showed incredible courage, in my view, and leadership over the last 7 months, as he did on nuclear policy for Japan, as he did on aligning Japan's interests with Europe in its time of need, and reevaluating its Russia policy of 40 years. So just to name 2 examples. So, and you don't have any real friction in the relationship, and you have a real alignment in a strategic vision, a policy vision, economic interests, and political alignment. So these, to me, this is a unique moment between the 2 countries with 2 leaders who actually have, I think, some political latitude and have shown political leadership in the past to actually make some of the tough calls that you have to make. That's 1. 2, I kind of left this out of the earlier question, but I think it's important. President Biden's success in passing a major infrastructure legislation, bipartisan, a major semiconductor, the chip legislation, major energy and climate legislation, and something that's dear to my, not that those aren't dear to my heart, but also bipartisanship on guns. He has shown an incredible leadership to getting things done that are essential for America's leadership on energy, climate, domestic economic growth through both the semiconductor and infrastructure. And one of the biggest pieces that was a challenge of the last 30 years was, while it was an incredible period of time of economic growth and opportunity, we have to be honest and say that economic opportunity was not spread equally or in a level sense where everybody felt that they had the same opportunity to make the most of that opportunity. And the new capitalism espoused by the Prime Minister, the policies implemented by President Biden, share a vision that we need more people on the winner's circle rather than looking outside in on those who are winning. And I think when you look at what the president has accomplished and did, not only the substance of what he accomplished, the bipartisanship in which he did the accomplishment, the investments that will be made, and then you look in contrast to 19.4% unemployment in China among youth, a horrible housing depression, a tech economy that's sputtering at best, a COVID policy that can't get out of its own way, and a government that lives in fear of its people, versus a country that is actually addressing its internal problems to make the most of the future, that also invests in the communities that have been, to be honest as an American, have been left out in the last 20 years. I think America is a strong bet for the future in partnership with a Japan that's also invested in making its future and making sure more Japanese people can participate in that future and making the most of it. That, I think, is the battle of the future, and I think the United States and Japan are poised to seize it the best.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for the strong remarks about the status of our alliance and also how we would address all these difficult questions around us. Let me take up a little bit about the Russian invasion into Ukraine. You know, we haven't really found out the exit. We don't know where it is going. Their assumption is it's going to take some time. The fighting going on. We place all the sanctions in place. That's beginning to make some impact on Russia, hopefully, but their economy is still there, not really crumbling. Support to Putin is still maintained, more or less. And in the meantime, the global market is shaken, not only energy and agricultural product. U.S. interest is high, and people are talking about the possible impact on the developing countries, loans and so forth. So, everything is not necessarily the cause coming from Russian invasion into Ukraine, but that triggered some of all these events taking place now in front of us. What's your conviction or perspective? Could we win all this, battle or all this, policy to make Russia less, threat to us?
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to answer this.
Yeah.
Because you say win, and that has there's 7 ways you could describe it. But
yeah.
let me say this, why I think Russia has lost. And I think the winning in the middle of a war is about being able to predict the future. So let me tell you what I know. Russia has lived in absolute fear of an organized, unified NATO. What do we have after a period of time? An organized, unified NATO. He's lived in fear of Sweden and Finland ever being part militarily, strategically, not just economically, with the West. No? Done that. 2, he lived in fear of the Ukraine ever being either politically, economically, or strategically aligned with the West. Well, I don't know what you think, but they're the greatest recipient of military assistance. Their arms are less now of the Russian-Soviet era and more of a European, NATO, American than ever before. They are clearly economically aligned with the West and making significant steps in the middle of a war to be politically aligned with the West. And I don't mean just philosophically, I mean in the system, dealing with corruption, dealing with elections, etc. So those are just, and then 4, Russia lived with the idea that Europe would be tied economically to Russia, and Russia would be an essential part of Europe. So I just can look at those things, and those are kind of like not small little things on the table like dust. Finland and Sweden are going to become members of NATO. That was a discussion for 70 years. NATO, it was fair to say after the fall of the wall, etc., in the last 20 years, was finding a purpose. There were good days and bad days. They now clearly, NATO is unified, and all the partners are stepping up in significant ways to contribute to the collective defense. That is the worst thing that Putin could ever have wanted, and he got it himself, in a way that we could never have led to. Ukraine, and more importantly than the government, the people of Ukraine, will never be put back into the bottle of being under Russian subjugation, ever. And never again will the rest of Europe, one of the largest markets in the world, if not, well, yeah, one of the largest markets of the world, ever be economically dependent on Russia, or Russia ever economically integrated to Europe. And I'm not a foreign policy person, I do politics. And if I can see that, there's no way Russia can win. So what does a win describe? Well, you got a lot of people who are much smarter than me thinking about that, defining that, describing it. But I don't see how Russia ever comes from this as a winner. And when your only friends in the world are North Korea, Syria, and Iran, and since our discussion earlier started about what friendship means, that tells you something. Those are the people that are standing with Russia, politically, internationally. And all they do is participate in nuclear coercion. That's what Iran does. That's what North Korea does. That's what Russia does. That is their MO.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ambassador. Let us talk a bit on the global economy and globalization. You mentioned your article in Nikkei. Not Yomiuri, but you know this.
That article wasn't good enough.
From cost efficiency to stability and sustainability, and also more of data technology or economic security and supply chain rather than the traditional notions of market access and so forth. What's your perspective more on the regional economic, undertakings like IPEF, and the United States is leading this exercise and the focus on some of the topics you just mentioned. And there was a meeting going on, and also Economic 2+2 also is trying to address all these economic security questions. Do you think that all these joint undertakings would be countering some of the Chinese economic coercions or other ascendancy of the thought?
Well, one is the 2+2, which is the Secretary of State and our Commerce Secretary with Mehdi and the Foreign Minister, is to elevate economic security and economic integration to the same status, same level that the 2+2 of state and defense have had historically, which I don't want to say, which basically is a way to illustrate that you can't that national security and economic security are heads and tails of the same coin. They're intimately connected. They're the tissue that hold the bonds and the friendship and the alliance, not only together, but what you build upon. That's number one. Number two, look, one of the things that I was trying to say in this piece, but one of the things I think, we are not done with the churn and the chaos and the transfer and the total, there's a more eloquent term than churn, but what COVID has done to the economic system. And when I say that, it's not just a public health sickness, but when countries were hoarding masks and healthcare things from what they used to export. Two, we found the stress in a system that used to be just driven by the lowest cost and the most efficient way to get to market was not really a reliable system for chaos, and chaos is not the right term, but for the churn and the kind of uncertainty is a better term that COVID left in its wake. Second, in combination with that, was the largest, most significant land war in Europe since World War II. Now, I frame that, obviously a lot of people talk about it as democracy versus autocracy, which is fair, but it's in direct violation of the United Nations agreement that brought nations together. And then the economic energy warfare waged by Russia, not just at the nuclear plant in Ukraine, but on all of Europe and the market. And the food scarcity war waged by Russia on the most dependent and most vulnerable countries and peoples in the rest of the world. That has exposed a massive vulnerability to the globalized system that came to be over the last 30 years. And I do want to come back to energy on one point that I kind of left. And then third, that China's has been involved in an active economic espionage and coercion for 20 years, but the world has tired of that with real consequences. Not just how they handled being forthcoming about COVID, although that was a mark. But over the last 7 years in this region, you take a look at what they did to Japan. Japan was the first target of that economic coercion with minerals and rare earth materials. You were the first target. Then Korea, then Australia, then Lithuania, then the Philippines. So when you do collect that, you got to understand, here's a country that's not playing by the rules in which everybody else is supposed to play for. Now, we have a phrase in the United States that, fool me once, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm sorry, and I think the world has caught up and said, okay, that game is over. So when you put those three together, events that have happened now in a condensed 4 to 5 years, we are now in the process of setting up a new set of ground rules, principles, ideals, values for what matters. And that's why the idea that some advocate, when all this clears away, we'll just go back to the old way, well, that's naive. You can't take 3 large events, one of them would change the way you look at the world, 3 of them in 4 or 5 years and say, we're just going to snap back into place. That's naive. It's not going to happen. And 2, the idea that all interactions are going to go into this quote-unquote deglobalization, et cetera, I also believe is not real. And that's one of the reasons I try to write about what I think are the emerging new principles that will guide international economics and commercial diplomacy. And they're basically replacing cost and efficiency with sustainability and stability. And I do think that corporate multinationals are dealing with what I call and think about it as a predictability premium. Second, energy stability and security is going to be to the next 20 years what market access was to the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. And then digital is such a dominant factor of economic, digital, a lot of people think of it as a technology. There's no industrial company, healthcare company, financial company, or service-based company, or manufacturing that is not in the digital business. They are all looking at data, collecting data, analyzing data to be better at doing both on the supply chain side and the customer side, smarter, more efficient, more effective, and more real. Now, on the energy, I think the United States and Japan have an incredible opportunity to be leaders. I kind of briefly touch on this, but Japan is an incredible leader in hydrogen research and deployment. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a lot of people thought it was just a dream. It's becoming not only an important reality, the engineering strength of Japan, the research strength of Japan is going to be essential to deploying hydrogen on a more commercial basis. That is a real strength. 2, we are stronger because not only our LNG, but our scientific research, both countries are on battery research, not just for the EVs, but storing sun and solar and wind is a real promising area. The 3 companies with the greatest holdings of battery patents are all Japanese. 3 companies with the most patents in EV batteries in the world are all Japanese. And then obviously both countries are intimately involved in both the research and deployment of SMR nuclear. I don't have to go down through each energy sector, but there's a real promise here. And that means the United States and Japan as dependable, not only allies to each other, but into the Southeast Asia, energy can play a major strategic benefit to our collective interests.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. Well,
You're welcome.
The Secretariat is advising me to get into taking questions from the audience.
Oh, okay.
But before doing that, let me ask you one final, question. In Japan, because of all this severe security environment, now the government is trying to change or to come up with a new national security policy toward the end of the year. Mr. Kitamura is here. He was a former chief of National Security Council. This issue is overdue, kind of. So, there is a much debate on missile defense, counter force capability, outer space and cyber, and how much money we will spend and so forth. What do you say? I mean, I don't think the United States is in a position to push Iran. It's more of in a position to observe friendly and be supportive of our own effort.
Well,
what you say?
We couldn't be happier that Japan is in the midst of drafting not only that national security document, the economic security document, and the other document. So we applaud it. It's your document for the security. We obviously, as partners and allies, are in constant conversations, both of what we're doing, what you're doing. But I think that's a recognition of the changing times that are happening in the region, and that those documents, and not just the documents, the strategic vision that's going to be embedded in the words and the sentences and the paragraphs and the pages are essential to reflect a mindset and a view. So I think that's really, really essential. I mean, look, in the Taiwan post the speaker's visit, China made a decision that they could have just done something around Taiwan. They fired a number of missiles into Japan's EEZ. They had a choice to leave that off. They didn't. As it relates to Japan's security and its national security, and how you then not only write a document, but think about the world, what resources you have in the defense budget, how you deploy it. They told you something in that act. We encourage you to see it clear-eyed, act responsibly. It's in your self-interest to write that document, but more importantly, to think in a very tough way about what that will reflect and all the policies that will come after that to bring that document to life for your self-defense.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. Let me quickly turn to the audience.
Okay.
Is that okay? Yes, please.
This is Haruo Shimada. The discussion of Ambassador and Ssasae-san stimulated our thought a lot. And in my judgment, the US-Japan security cooperation is perhaps the best in history of US, ever since the security arrangement has been initiated, from some 70 years ago, thanks to the efforts of both leaders. I have one question. Even that the capacity of the cooperation, defense cooperation between the two countries, are not really maximized in the current situation. I have two observations. The one is that the decision-making system is not integrated as some relations that we see in the NATO major member and the United States. The US-Japan, Japan-US security alliance is perhaps the best in the world, and yet the capacity has been fully exploited. Another thing is a close technological cooperation to develop weapons and systems, not fully exploited. And I'd like to hear the experts' view, what we can do together, particularly what the United States can do to work with the Japanese side. Thank you.
Ambassador, you want to go, please?
Am I what?
You want to speak?
No. If I answer that question, I'll have to go into a witness protection plan. Let me just make one kind of general observation. No relationship is static. It's an evolving dynamic. And I would just say there are good days in that dynamic and bad days, but the truth is, because we're trusted friends and allies, we work on improving it, not in pointing fingers. And I would just say to you, I'm not an expert. I've been here 7 months. But I look back at all my preparation and briefing and what everybody told me, and then when I got here, this is a different Japan, a stronger Japan, Japan ready to take up and stand up and take on responsibilities for the alliance and partnership. And if I had anything to say, it's not actually to the Japan part. I think a lot of people, quote unquote, who are Japan experts back in America should take note of the new Japan. It's going to benefit the alliance in a major way.
Thank you. I have my own views, but I will limit what I say.
You don't have the respect. Go ahead, go for it.
No, it's okay. There are some other questions, actually, written questions that we received in advance. So let me pick one or two of them. And this is related to national security. This is a question about nuclear deterrence issues. You know, Putin is threatening the possibility of using nuclear weapons and so forth. And we know that there is extended deterrence between Japan and the United States. And we understand that it's going to be strengthened and so forth. But how this goes, how do you reconcile with this requirement of making deterrence stronger? And in the meantime, how we would go for the future disarmament and management of the armament? And this is a tough question. This is, and also related to Hiroshima G7 meeting next year. The Prime Minister is hosting, obviously, he has to pursue the two different kind of conflicting goals. What's your view? This is a question from the audience.
Look, I mean, I think there's nothing more than I can shed light on as it relates to our relationship with Japan and our deterrence. But before you even deal with nuclear, there's a lot of ways to communicate a readiness and a deterrence that doesn't include nuclear alone. And so I think that that's what the debate about both the Japan's, not debate, but the development of a national security document, the policies that will flow from that, the dollars that will flow from that, what security elements that will flow from that. So the nuclear is one piece. But I would also say, if you're using the analogy, this is my observation, Russia's not threatening a nuclear weapon out of strength. They're doing it out of weakness, and they're doing it because of this quote-unquote vaulted military has failed miserably. They outgun, outman Ukraine, and we're on day 190. So any discussion by Russia today that involves anything related to nuclear is not done out of power and strength. It's done out of weakness and ineptitude that's now been exposed. As to quote Shakespeare, the emperor has no clothes.
Thank you. The final question, possibly?
Is this the bonus question for 200?
Yeah, this is a very tough question.
Okay. Obviously, with your smile, I look forward to it.
America. What's your perspective on the midterm election? What's the future of Trump? Is he coming back again the 24th? Or what kind of problem Trump is having will be affecting? Or the U.S. President, Biden's popularity is not getting better and so forth. So what's your focus? I mean, what's your perspective? You don't have to say much. I know that as an ambassador, it's
Does anybody, listen, as I see a number of my friends and colleagues in the room that have come from European countries, in the United States, as that's true for them, you're not allowed to do anything or say anything about domestic politics in your country. But rest assured, I have plenty of thoughts about it. It would be unnatural for me as, given the political animal that I am. That said, I cannot professionally, and I'm showing a rare level of restraint, I want you to know, which I don't usually have. So I cannot do it. It's in violation of the oath that I took. I represent the United States of America. But I do have a view, and let me just say, when the microphones are off and we're just having a beer, I'll express them to you.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. I said more or less the similar stuff while I was in Washington, so whenever I was asked about Japanese politics. Well, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Ambassador. Please give him the biggest applause. Thank you, Ambassador.
Ambassador Ssasae, Ambassador Emanuel, thank you very much.